Hello, everyone. Welcome to A Jew Like Me. My name is Jessica Israel, and this is a podcast for all of us who love Torah, but have felt like we are not fully represented in mainstream Jewish life or the pop culture idea of who a Jew is or what a Jew looks like. We are the children of Abraham, and this podcast is to create our place at the table, let our voices be heard, and celebrate the multiculturalism of Judaism. Let's get into our episode. So let's talk about the us versus them that we so frequently encounter. This is when people say Jews or Jewish and blacks, Jews and blacks, or Jewish people and black people. And it's very funny because many times people will say this with the idea that they're being inclusive. But what they don't understand is that it's accomplishing the exact thing that they think they're projecting. When you say Jews and blacks, that is not in any way, shape, or form inclusive. In fact, it's very divisive. In fact, it's very demeaning to Jewish Black Americans or Black Jews. Let's not forget, you can be a Black Jew, but that doesn't mean you're American. So that's why I specifically said Black Jews and Jewish Black Americans. Not every Black person is American. So, just understanding the language and the words that we're using, because for so long, what we've gone through, especially Black people in this country who have lived in this country, and especially those who have descended from people who were brought here as kidnapped victims and enslaved after they were captured and kidnapped and suffered horrors for hundreds of years through generations. Many of us have had our cultures wiped away. And so when you use a term like African American, when you use a term like Black, you're not really telling a person anything about the individual that you're describing. Because what does it mean when you say, oh, well, there's a Black person? Well, where are they from? What country are they from? What, state, city, region, town? How do they look? What's their faith? What do they believe in? What foods did they grow up eating? We are not a monolith. And we use these generalized terms to describe each other. And what that does is that, in essence, wipes away our identity. That is what these generalized terms do. So we're going to get specific here. Okay? When we're talking about Black people, we're going to say Black Jews, or if we're talking about Black Jews that are American, Jewish Black Americans, or we're going to say non-Jewish Black people or non-Jewish Black Americans. The same way you would say white Hispanic or Black Hispanic, white non-Hispanic or Black non-Hispanic. And there's a reason for that. It's because race is really a made-up concept. We know this. If you don't know, I would really suggest you Google something called the Virginia House of Burgesses, the meeting that occurred in the 1660s, where in this country they stated that a person was a slave based on the condition of their mother. That right there was the establishment of race. Yes, everyone, race did not always exist. This is something that can easily be researched, and you'll find it probably in less than 5 minutes. So if someone says, well, of course it always exists, we always were different races. No. People were identified by their nationality. People were identified by their tribe. People were identified by where they came from, what they believed. That is how people were identified. Maybe you can give a description of how someone looks, but you were not identified by race. And the way that started in this country, particularly in the United States, is because when the transatlantic slave trade was full force, one of the things that these abhorrent individuals, we are not going to make excuses and say what was the thought of the time, they were abhorrent because not everyone participated, not everyone owned a slave, and not everyone thought this was a great thing. No, they were abhorrent individuals who were capturing, kidnapping, subjugating, assaulting, abusing people. Women, children, men, mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, clergy, professionals, teachers. These people had identities. They didn't just come out of the wild, as some like to believe. And even in the wild, there are social hierarchies, there are structures, there are civilizations. So let us get back to this, is what I was saying, and then we'll get back to our discussion on Jews and blacks and how we really need to stop that terminology. So back to about race being something that is fake. They say it's a social construct. Well, that's a nice term for saying fake. It doesn't exist. It's not real. So when these individuals were kidnapped and enslaved and tortured and subjugated here, the abhorrent individuals who did so tried to use the excuse that these people were savages. They didn't know their God. They were savages. They were subhuman. They look different than us. They act different than us. That is what they said. And once these Christian preachers started to conduct conversions, which obviously they're forced conversions. It's very hard to say that someone's coming to your faith willingly when you have kidnapped, tortured, enslaved them, and it's made to seem like the only way they would be free. And when you are doing everything in your power to diminish, prohibit, and destroy the practice and even remembrance of the faith where they came from. Let's make it clear too, this idea that people were enslaved here and came from countries in Africa and tribes where they only practiced polytheistic faiths, that is a lie. If you listen to my Juneteenth podcast, we actually discussed Black Jews that were kidnapped and enslaved. Yes, people, what you learned in school, this idea that everyone was beating the drum to foreign deities and, had multiple gods, that's not true. Yes, there may have been people who came from certain areas or tribes where they worshipped multiple gods, but Jews, Black Jews, and Black Muslims, African Jews, African Muslims were kidnapped and enslaved. They like you to believe that that's not the case because then it points to this idea that they were these uncivilized people, because we tend to view in our society anyone who comes from a polytheistic faith is uncivilized. That speaks to that bigotry in that regard, that prejudice in that regard. It's funny because even today, people will view someone that way, but more readily accept someone who believes that there is no God. You accept that, you think that is, well, this person's choice or this person's, belief just because on what they see, and that's it, and, they don't have faith. But you don't think that they're uncivilized for being an atheist, but if someone believes in multiple gods, you believe they're uncivilized. Another part of the bias that we have, but that's a whole conversation for a different day. So, getting back to this, when these Christian preachers and ministers would, how do I put this? When these Christian preachers and ministers would conduct these conversions on enslaved individuals, the individuals who were being subjugated, they would then say, okay, well now this person's a Christian. We can't hold them captive anymore. We can't beat and abuse our Christian brothers and sisters. We're not supposed to do that. They're no longer subhuman. It was okay when they were subhuman. They weren't like us, but now they're like us, so we can't do that. And slave owners started freeing some of their slaves. You guys catching this? When people were converting to Christianity, the slaves, people who were enslaved, they were then starting to get freed. It was becoming a thing because the preachers would say, hey, you can't keep them there anymore. They're now a Christian. They're now a brother or sister. They're one of us. Even if they didn't feel like they were fully one of them because they still viewed them as less than. But now they're our brother and sister. Well, slave owners did not like that. The government did not like that. Because remember, the government was full of slave owners. Slave owners who owned quite a bit of land and were subjugating quite a bit of people. So that's when they determined this newfangled idea of, well, wait, we're not subjugating them because they're just, practicing a different faith. We're subjugating them because they're black. And now the slave must follow the condition of the mother, or the child must follow the condition of the mother. So if the mother was a slave, the child now has to be a slave. If the father was a slave, the child now has to be a slave. That is what the Virginia House of Burgesses document states at that meeting in the 1660s. That is where it started, everyone. And I'm sure you probably did not learn that in school, but this is something that's readily available, knowledge that's readily available for us to take a look at. I mean, this isn't an opinion, this is a fact. And that is when, again, they changed it from, well, these people aren't Christians, so they're less than, they're savages, to, well, we can't say that anymore because now we've got a lot of them converted and we can't keep losing our victims. We can't lose our free labor. We can't lose these people that we've been subjugating, and there's no way we want them to be equal to us. So we're going to state that you have to follow the condition of your parent. Now, if you're following the condition of your parent, really the condition of the mother, essentially, because as we know, the slave owners would regularly rape female slaves, and in doing so, these women would have children as a result of that rape. And there's no way that they were going to say, well, now that child is a free person. They enslaved their own children, these abhorrent individuals. So when they came up with this concept now, this freed them up from any pressure from the preachers, from the pastors, from the community at all, where it said, okay, well, it doesn't matter if they, accept our Bible. It doesn't matter if they accept our beliefs. This is why they need to stay in that role. And now let's get back to the original discussion, now that we understand where that came from. When we're saying Jews and blacks, when we say that, we're making it seem like there are no black Jews. And of course someone will hear this and say, well, of course we know there are black Jews. There are Ethiopian Jews in Israel. Okay, well, Ethiopia is not the only place that has black Jews. You have Jews throughout the continent of Africa, a continent with multiple countries, multiple states in each country, cities, towns, tribes. There are black Jews dispersed throughout the continent of Africa. And they're Jews because they're Jews. They're not Jews because they have a white qualifier, which is a big problem that we see these days, is that a lot of times you will see someone and they'll be the face of a Black Jew, where there is no one face. We're not a monolith, okay? Even with me, my opinion is my opinion. That's why this is called a Jew like me, not the Jew. I'm not the Jew. I'm just a Jew, okay? And you'll see a Black Jew that they'll show. And I actually saw this on Twitter recently in a campaign talking about a Black Jew who was celebrating her Jewish culture, and you see her Black family, and it's beautiful. And then you pan a little bit in the video, and you see one of her white parents. Now, there's obviously nothing wrong at all with an interracial relationship or being biracial, not in the slightest. However, in this aspect, it was a bit problematic because the way that they showed it was as if she's only a Jew because of that white Jewish parent. Well, why didn't you show a family of Black Jews who doesn't have a white qualifier? It again pushes this narrative of a one-drop rule that started in slavery, where if you have one drop of Black blood, you're Black. And this idea that you need a white Jew in your family to qualify you as a Jew, versus you just being a Jew because you're a Jew. And that is one thing we'll get into too. That's going to be a different episode of who is a Jew. But right now, let's stick to this us versus them problem that we continue to have, and that pushes out and perpetuates this narrative of Black people being separate, apart, and something different than Jews. And that, Black Jews are really just kind of left out of the discussion regularly, way too regularly. So online, I was really happy to see this post because, this is a different post we're talking about now. I was really happy to see this post because I originally took down this podcast because I thought, man, I do not want the hate that's going to come from this. I don't want the hate from the anti-Semitism that's going to come from this. And I don't really want to deal with the lack of support or potential hate from within the Jewish community. Jewish Twitter is very toxic. I'm sorry. That is the truth. It doesn't mean everybody. But in general, a lot of times if you're looking up posts, you'll see Jewish individuals either talking about every single negative thing that has to deal with the current environment and anti-Semitism, which, yes, we need to shine a light on anti-Semitism. That is true, absolutely. But there's not as much uplifting of Judaism. There's not as much uplifting of Jews. And sometimes when I see it, it is framed in a lens where it's an us against them, not necessarily with Black people, but with Palestinians, with Muslims. I see a lot of Islamophobia. I'm not with any of that, guys. If you're expecting to hear a podcast where we're going to be doing that, tune out now. No thanks, no offense. I don't want that type of support because that's not what I stand for at all. All right, so let's make that very, very, very clear. But you see a lot of that, and it's troublesome. And I thought, man, this is just really toxic online right now. Like I said, the Twitter sphere. Okay, the Twitter sphere where you're seeing is what they call Jewish Twitter. That's where I'm seeing a lot of that. It doesn't mean every Jew is toxic. Obviously, we know that's not true. I mean, that would be ridiculous for me to say that when I'm a Jew and I'm talking to Jews. That doesn't make sense. But when I saw it, I'm like, man, I don't know if I really want to do this podcast because I'm going to be talking about sensitive subjects. I'm going to be talking about things that challenge the mainstream of what Judaism is seen as in this country and some of these generally accepted things now out in the mainstream. I'm going to be challenging that. And it may make people feel uncomfortable, and it may make people upset. And a lot of times when you just don't fall in line, people don't like it. And I thought, man, I don't want that smoke. I don't think I wanted that trouble. But what changed my mind is I want to start getting rid of the social media that I had set up for this podcast. And I saw lots of likes, well, before I deleted it, on Instagram. I saw that I was getting a lot of listens on this podcast. And I'm like, wait a minute, I just put this up. I haven't even promoted this thing. I mean, this is just brand new. And it hit me, okay, there are people out here that want to hear this. It made me remember why I was doing this and who I was doing this for. But I still had to sleep on it. I still had to pray on it. I thought about Proverbs 10, where it says, and I'm just paraphrasing, about a wise man. And, a wise man is going to accept instruction and learning. And so it just was a reminder that this podcast isn't for everyone. It's not for everyone. Not everyone's going to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear and the heart to receive. That is the truth. They're just not. And that's fine. Because those who it is for, they need it, they deserve it, they want it. And it's fair. And for me, I'm not just doing this for me. I'm doing this because I feel like it's something that I've been led to do by Hashem. And so I'm going to always let that lead me. But going back, I saw on Twitter this post by a rabbi who happens to be a Black female. And she was calling out in a very respectful way and loving way the website myjewishlearning.com. They posted on that website a prayer for Juneteenth. And in this prayer for Juneteenth, before it even begins, they go literally, it's only 3 lines, the beginning part of it. And out of those 3 lines, the first 2 did not actually mention Black people. It mentions Jewish people and slavery in Egypt. And then just, the first line saying what Juneteenth is, celebrating the end of slavery. Which, if you listen to our Juneteenth episode, we explained that is actually not true. So if you have not listened to that, please go take a listen. But it isn't until that last line where it talks about, specifically mentions Black American slaves. Then it gives a prayer. And in this prayer, which is a page long on their site, only 2 lines out of that prayer talk about Black slaves. 2 lines. And not only is it just 2 lines, but prior to those 2 lines, it keeps using the term us and our with regard to Jewish people. It says, you heard our ancestors' cries as slaves in Egypt, freed us from harsh labors with an outstretched arm, delivered us from bondage, took us to be your people, and brought us to our promised land. Then it says, you heard the cries of Black slaves in this country, freed them officially on this day with an outstretched arm. And then it goes back to the, deliver us from the bondage, take us to be your people, bring us to a moment. And this rabbi, brought this to their attention and said, hey, this is really disappointing. You've quite literally created an us versus them approach in this prayer. And it's very disappointing for Black Jews and Jews of color, because this is something that we regularly go through, where this whole time they're talking about Jews and using the term us. But once they talked about Black people, they used the term them. As if there were no Black Jews. As if Black Jews were not enslaved in this country. As if Black Jews do not exist. And this is a popular website, guys. I'm sure all of us have probably heard of it or taken a look at it. If you Google something, it's probably popped up because they've got some great SEO. But this is troubling. This is really troubling. And this is something we need to really think about, and we need to stop allowing it to happen and start calling it out more. You know, on The View, a show I personally, I just don't watch. There's just too much arguing for me. I need peace in my life. There was a segment, I believe a couple weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago even, where Sunny Hostin was mentioning Jews and blacks. She literally was saying that, well, Jews and black people. And I'm like, okay, this is again the problem. And you're saying this on nationally syndicated television. Why are you saying that? Especially as someone who I believe she's a black Hispanic. So why would you use the term Jews and blacks when, if anything, she should be someone who understands, you know, the myriad of intersectionality, I will say, where not every Jew is white. When we're saying these things, if you're saying Jew and then you have to later on say and blacks, that means you are promoting this idea that Jews are white and that every Jew is white, or at minimum, no Jew is black. That is a problem. And I think we've been silent long enough. And I think we need to really start calling this out. I know I will when I see this. When someone says, well, Jews and blacks, well, do you mean Jews and non-Jewish black Americans, or Jews and non-Jewish black individuals? Because you can't say Jews and blacks as if we are a separate entity that in no way, shape, or form is Jewish or affiliated with Judaism. Thank you guys for listening today. I know this one was a little bit longer than my previous podcast. I try to keep them a bit shorter on the short end. But this is something we've got to talk about. We've got to stop parsing our words. We're going to make some people feel uncomfortable, and that's fine, because guess what? We've been made to feel uncomfortable all of this time. And now that needs to end. That needs to end. We deserve our seat at the table. We deserve our respect as well. And we're not asking for much. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast today. I really appreciate the support. If you would like to get in touch or stay connected, please visit us on our Twitter or Instagram at A Jew Like Me. Also, if you're interested and would like to send a personal donation, because this is a labor of love, my Cash App is Torah Blessed, TorahBlessed. Thank you again so much for the support, guys, and I really look forward to chatting again next time.